Hi, I'm G. I'm part of the Ulex project core team, and today I'm going to be speaking with Carol Marín and Maria Llanos about a series, a six-part video series they've just created titled Learning from Latin America, Building a Common Front. Good morning, Carol and Maria.
Hello, very great here to be here.
Hello, good morning.
So all three of us have been, we've worked together. We've all been involved in the Ulex project's Ecology of Social Movements training and research work connected to that. We started doing that work because, well, the kind of obvious acknowledgement that to combat the interlocking systems of oppression that we face, we need interconnected movements of resistance and regeneration. But we all know that that's not an easy thing to achieve. Back in, I think it was 2020, the three of us were involved in a survey and a whole set of focus groups with activists in Europe. And over and over again, people were saying that fragmentation, division within our movements between different kinds of actors, and the inability to generate coherent strategies across those differences were some of the biggest challenges they faced. And so we started doing the research, we started creating resources to help activists, help our movements to learn from each other, right? To learn within and between our movements. And within that research and those initiatives, one of the strands of inquiry was how do we explore the relation, how do we support more effective relationships between social movements and institutional actors, like political parties, for example, right? And this was something that both of you found especially interesting, and you were particularly inspired by the experience on the ground over many decades in the Frente Amplio in Uruguay. So the series is a fruit of that inquiry. So, I mean, for those who aren't really familiar with the Frente Amplio, could you just say a little bit about the history, a little bit about the background?
Yeah, well, the Frente Amplio is a left-wing sociopolitical coalition in Uruguay that emerged in the early 70s as a response to the repressive and authoritarian policies of the government at that time. Things were getting really tense, civil liberties were being stripped away, and dissent was being crushed. So what they do, leftist political parties, social movements, unions, and civil society groups came together to create a united front to resist the right-wing government and fight for social justice and democracy. But in the 73, the military staged a coup, and Uruguay fell under a brutal dictatorship. But the Frente Amplio didn't disappear. People, especially women, kept the resistance alive on the ground. They organized, supported each other, and held onto this vision of a better Uruguay. It is a really remarkable how they keep hope alive during such a terrible time. When democracy returned in the 85, the Frente Amplio transitioned from being a resistance movement to a major political force. They keep growing, and in the 2004, they made history by winning the presidency for the first time. And they have been in government over many since then, including winning the more recent elections last year in just November. Through all these years in power, they have achieved a lot, advancing women's rights, labor rights, and social welfare program. It was a huge shift for the country.
Yeah, I think just to mention a couple of things that in our view makes the Frente Amplio unique is on the one hand, its ability to bring together different actors under one umbrella. So Carol had spoken about the diverse range of actors that despite their differences and even discrepancies, all union around a common goal, democracy and social justice. The second key aspect of the Frente Amplio, we think, is that is deeply rooted in grassroots participation. The local committees is a structure that ensures that ordinary people are part of and have a voice in the political processes, which is a big part of their success, as we say. We think that in many ways, the Frente Amplio is one of the unique models of how to build sustainable and inclusive political coalitions.
So, I mean, I've been lucky enough to hear about the research as you've gone along, and certainly I found some of it inspiring. In trainings that I've run in the last few years, I'm often find myself quoting pepemujica, who is an important figure in the Frente Amplio, and the quote where he says something like, one of the great tragedies of our times is that while the left are divided by ideas, the right are united by interests. And so this kind of like finding ways to work across differences is definitely a kind of an aspect of inspiration. Could you tell us a little bit more about some of the things that have really inspired you in doing this work?
There are many things, but I think I'm gonna like outline three, and I think it speaks to what you just mentioned, the quote from Pepe Mujica. I think the Frente Amplio has given a lot of importance and time to nurture culture and values. One of the interviewees, Romina, speaks about empathy, generosity, and patience as instrumental ways of being in order to make decisions together. It is from these cultures and values that the structures and procedures develop so that they ensure that all the voices are heard. Also, I think it is remarkable the way their history of resistance and unity is still very present and very much alive. We all have in our past stories of resistance and unity. For example, in Spain, we have the coalition in the left during the Civil War, or the anarchist movement in the 30s, or even more recently, we have the experience of the Indignados movement or the Occupy. But this history that is also part of our DNA is not being remembered and claimed in the ways I see it in the Frente Amplio, which is really serving as a force of imagining new futures. And lastly, and shortly, I think it's important to mention that the Frente Amplio is not perfect and has made a lot of mistakes. It lost the 2019 elections. And I think what is remarkable is the way they went about it. They developed a whole process of listening, engaging social movements and local committees in order to understand their mistakes and to listen about the complaints and reflections of the grassroots that actually shaped their political comeback.
Yeah, for me, like as Maria said, I found so many inspirations and learnings in exploring the Frente Amplio when I begin with. One of the things that stands out for me is the need for a radical imagination that can help us break out the framework of the dominant neoliberal hegemony. Too often, our activism are shaped by defeatism and pessimism that minimize our capacity to act for a social transformation. I think it's so important to break out the dominant narratives and find the power to imagine and envision other possible worlds. This is something we find in the Frente Amplio, where they use the language of real and concrete utopias to encourage ambitious strategies, which so often that. I think we have all enough of Hollywoodian apocalyptic dystopias where everyone is against everyone else, and everyone for himself prevails. I feel this is time to create connection based on empathy and solidarity. This is an attitude I find in the Frente Amplio really present. And sorry by my English, I try to do my best.
Thanks, Carol. So maybe you can tell us some of the sort of key areas of practice that you feel we can learn from.
Well, one thing that obviously are doing is directly engagement with political institutions, like as you mentioned, G. As I mentioned just last year, they entered in government again. So there's a lot of learn about this kind of engagement from the grassroots into the institutions. How do we keep this relationship between movements and parties real? How do we overcome our simplistic and cynicism about the state? For example, I found really funny, Mujica tell us in a really funny and simplistic way that the state is a tool. He said, like any tool, it can be used badly or well, like a hammer. We can use it to hammer nails or hit ourselves in the head. I think there are things we can learn from the Frente Amplio about how to make better use of the state.
I have created like four pillars, four principles, let's say. So the first one will be remember our past to enable our future, and I spoke about it already. So I'll move to the second one, which is educating political parties and movements on what is possible. I think it's very important to understand how these two actors work, to comprehend the mechanisms that are available in the institutions, the rhythms, and also the pressures, and also the leverage points that we can find, as well as the nature of social movement organizing, which is very distinct, and the key role that they can play in societal change. This education is crucial to sustain a creative tension amongst these two actors, and also to kind of evoke empathy and solidarity. So the third one would be recognizing different levels of agreement. When describing their laborious, long, and complex decision-making processes, they distinguish between three dimensions. First one would be work on the common ground. Second, design paths to address differences. And also, lastly, recognize the polar points. The fourth point, the last one, is structure and strategy follows values and principles. I have already spoke about this, but I think it is remarkable how values such as listening, acceptance, compassion, humbleness are present in nearly all of the interviews. But it is very important that we translate values into structures, and I think this is the key of the Frente Amplio. In nearly all of its organigram, from the Congress to the Mesa Política, to the Secretaría General, which are the organizing entities, there is representation from local and departmental committees. So I think it is revolutionary in terms of direct participation, or as Romina says, participación diaria y cotidiana. No, sorry. As Romina says, participación directa y cotidiana. Direct and day-to-day participation.
And this series, in a way, it's just the beginning, right? I mean, it's a resource, it's a learning resource. What next? I hear ideas about webinars or community inquiries, this kind of thing. What next?
So, I mean, we really hope to inspire some interest in this case study and perhaps, as you say, just develop a series of conversations with social movements and perhaps other actors across Europe. Yeah, this might take the shape of roundtables or maybe seminars, workshops where participants can really explore some of the key principles that we have put forward as a Frente Amplio experience, and have time to put in conversation this experience with their local contexts. This is something that we hope to begin doing maybe later in the year. So keep tuned.
Excellent. So yeah, so there is a dedicated page in the Ulex website. I imagine there will be now the address will come up on this video. You can go there, you can see the entire series, and you can also from there get in touch with Maria and Carol and engage in this process of dialogue and inquiry around what can we learn from the Frente Amplio? How is it going to be relevant to us today in our practices, our social transformative practices? So yeah, brilliant. Thank you both so much. I hope it really does stimulate a lot of inquiry and reflection. Thanks, Carol. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. And also, once again, thank you to all the amazing activists that has dedicated our time to do this series in the Frente Amplio. Saludos, Uruguay.